Well, greetings and welcome to Let's Talk. My name is Jay O'Brien, and I'm a pastor at Scarlet City. And Let's Talk is an opportunity to discuss faith and the intersection of life. And today we're joined by Nick Nye. Nick is a good friend, but that's not the only thing on his resume that he's a friend of mine. He planted.
That would be a sad thing, right? Wouldn't it?
Oh man, I thought opposite.
No, I'm just kidding. The opposite.
Nick was the founding pastor of Veritas Community Church. You planted it, what, 11 years ago? 12 years ago? 20?
Yeah, I mean,
50?
yeah, 20, 30, I don't know. Yeah, we started in 2007, really started laying the groundwork.
Wow. And then a few years ago, you transitioned to were the lead pastor at Apostles Church in New York City. And last year, you and Brittany and the family moved back to Columbus, and now you have a role with Catalyst in Columbus, which is an organization seeking to catalyze a gospel movement in the city. And so it's good to have you on, man. It's so good to see you. And
I'm glad to be here.
I say it like I haven't seen you in a while. No, it's good to have you here. Talked a little bit about that city kind of movement. Why, now that you're in this role with Catalyst and it's been a part of your vision and passion for years, even at Veritas, why is it important that we invest in a city reaching movement?
Well, I think probably maybe the big idea is it comes from the scriptures. And I think in the Bible, we see sort of a first movement in a city specific in Jerusalem. That's where we see sort of the first patterns emerge, in like Acts chapter 2, famous story of the Spirit coming, and we see 3,000 get saved. And then in chapter 3, there's 5,000 men, that's just the men they're counting. There's lots more who become Christians and have this personal experience with God. And so what's fascinating is that all these people become Christians. And of course, they didn't have these mega complex buildings and such where they were able to enfold them all into one single congregation, one single church. And so what you begin to see there is this gathering, or all these gatherings emerge all around the city. Yet you read all throughout Acts, the church in Jerusalem is referred to as a single body, a single church. And so you see this kind of pattern emerge out of that, and of these multiple kind of congregations, yet there's one church in the city. And so I think you can apply that even into today, where you see we're a global society, of course, now, especially over the internet, and we're connected as more than we've ever been. But the idea still stood where there was sort of a culture in a city that is unique to that city, addressing the needs and the people of that city. And Acts 2 and 3 in the beginning of the book was a predominantly Jewish community, and so they had their particular flavor and feel and culture and society that worked. And so just as Columbus does, right? We have a sort of a common ethos, common culture that Columbus embodies. Yet there are several thousand churches in Columbus, and so we're the church here. So there's this kind of unique overlay in that. But if you bring that into deeply into what Columbus is, you see that sort of functioning, working together, functioning as one body, as a singular organism. We see a lot of spiritual vitality. Acts chapter 4, they had all things in common. They were sharing. You can't do that as easily, like across different cities. You can now, but there's still something unique about the spiritual vitality of caring for one another and the experiencing the Holy Spirit in the same way. There's the other thing is a city witness. I mean, Jesus tells us in the famous line in John 17 that he's praying for our unity, and he wants our unity just as he and the Father are one. And that communicates to the city. They will know us by our love, our witness.
Mm.
There's a stewardship reason, for us to being able to steward similar resources, so we're not replicating things, we're not doing the same thing over and over again, but we're really able to steward ministry together and how we do life together. There's opportunities for training and equipping together, that we see throughout the scripture, but we also see today. I mean, and nowadays, the Palau organization out in Portland, Oregon, has identified there to be nearly 700 of these sort of what they call gospel city movements
Mm.
all around the world right now, where these cities are coming together. The churches are coming together to experience some of the things I just mentioned, and experiencing what does this life look like together as the body of Christ, despite our differences, and actually emphasizing the differences and the unique. So it's not like a one size fits all kind of thing, but they're seeing in modern days house churches and mega churches, and more urban and suburban, kind of all mixing together to be able to create this sort of ecosystem of unity, and all that really stems from the Bible.
Mm. What one of the things in that, so you were in New York and you were in Columbus before, you go to New York and you come back. I'm sure you come back with some kind of new lens. One of the things I appreciate with how you think about it is this ethos of Columbus. What do you think are some of the qualities or unique characteristics of Columbus as we think about ministry? What are some things that kind of come to mind for you?
That's a good question. When I first moved to Columbus in 2007, an article came out that was entitled Columbus, Every Man's City.
Hmm.
And the point of the article was how Columbus really represents every man in a unique way, where, we're the swing state, and Columbus certainly is a swing city, and politically speaking, but what also has this sort of unique thing where there's immigrant, and there's literally everything here, um, in a unique perspective. But there's also sort of an Ohio against the world mentality, and Columbus
Hmm.
certainly has that. When I first moved here in 2007, there wasn't sort of the pride that you find in Columbus and in Ohio for sure, and that has grown a lot. But because I think people have found the uniqueness of all all the diversity, but it's smaller, and it's sort of a town-like feel, even though there's over 2 million people here. There's sort of a unique sort of we're all in this together kind of mentality, and I think that has really ushered in a interesting dynamic. Now there's everybody wears Columbus shirts, and none of that stuff really existed. Homage was an idea, that I just didn't have that, and nobody was into that kind of stuff. But now I think it's because there's sort of been like, hey, this isn't that bad. This is actually cool. Like, we're all together, but it's smaller, and we all kind of know each other. The business community, small business communities know each other. The pastors like are starting to connect and know each other, and I think those are really the sort of the foundations of what a gospel movement can start to look like.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my experience. I think when I would talk to people because we moved here from Texas, and they'd be like, "Oh, you got like LeBron? Is he Columbus?" Like, no, Cleveland's different. One of the neat things about Columbus, I would compare it to Cincinnati. Cincinnati, where I grew up in that region, if you were in the city, the kind of first question was, "What high school did you go to?" Like,
Hmm.
I never get that question in Columbus. A lot of people have relocated here. There is that sense of unity. even though there's pride in particular neighborhoods, we do see it as kind of a collective whole, which I think is really, really compelling and exciting, and a neat place to live and
Hmm.
lead. One of the things you've mentioned in the past is and you even referenced it earlier, the ecosystem, thinking of a gospel movement as not just a local church, not just this particular thing, but how it all plays together. Can you tease that out a little more? What do you mean by ecosystem as it relates to a city as a whole?
Yeah, that's when you start seeing that it's not just like one stream that is kind of capturing this spirit of gospel transformation, gospel renewal, but you're seeing multiple streams experience it at the same time, like church and past businesses are kind of reshaping how they do business, to healthcare, and justice and that kind of thing. And again, a lot of my understanding, I want to root this in what is the Bible kind of talk about. What is the precedent set there? And I mean, in the scriptures, we see like God raising up prophets
Hmm.
um, that proclaim God's vision, and bring God's vision of what justice is and how God's people are living, not in line with who his vision. I mean, you see like Samuel and Elijah and Zechariah, but then you see kings that become great influencers for God's vision, like Asa and Jehoshaphat and Josiah, and they have like this stirring conviction to make things sort of as God would have them on earth. But then you see lay leaders start emerging and heralding God's vision as well. I think of, I mean, starting with John the Baptist, who was just, he didn't have like a title. And all the way to even like Phoebe, she was a marketplace leader who delivered the book of Romans and spoke about Romans to Rome. And these leaders didn't have these official titles, so to speak, but they were pillars really for communicating the gospel. And then not to forget about people like you who are pastors. I mean, Peter and Paul, who really took on sort of the apostolic leadership in the book of Acts. They really brought this vision of how the gospel could transform a city. And so you kind of what as we look at all these leaders in history, like really where the ecosystem comes is when all of those spheres start working together to
Mm.
say, what is God's vision for the city? What is God's vision for this local context? And again, I think we're as a digital world that's global, I think we're starting to become a lot, or we will need to become a lot more local in how that the global stuff's never going to go away, but how do we become more radically local in what our kings and our prophets and our priests and our lay leaders, how all of that is going to start working together to really paint a picture for God's vision for healthcare and education and all the arts and entertainment and all of those various spheres.
That's good.
And that ecosystem starts working together. And I don't think we're there yet as a city. I think we see glimpses of it here and there. I think we see like and even if we look at modern history, sort of the a lot of the Christianity sort of put its hope in these sort of moral majority, conservative, like we just need to get in places of political power. But then I think a lot of that's starting to shake off, where we're not really interested in those spheres of power, but we're actually seeing really sort of community oriented, small neighborhood focus, agents of change happen right in those spheres. And so when we can see all of that start to come together, then you start seeing this ecosystem of God's vision for a city.
Mm. That's good. And it speaks to the truth of reality of life. I mean, we're all connected. Like, if
Hmm.
anything, the whole COVID-19 pandemic has showed us that what happens in the healthcare system has huge implications for what happens in the business sector, which has huge implications for our faith and spiritual well-being and life and school. I mean, it is all connected. And for churches that don't understand that reality, that's why people go to church and they don't see how it applies to life sometimes. And to your
Yeah,
point,
totally.
the gospel, it's like, if our view of the gospel is just forgiveness of sin, and we don't see the broader story from Genesis to Revelation, we miss God's heart.
Mm.
So that's so good. What Another question I have for you? So a lot of pastors, when we would talk about this kind of stuff, would agree, yes, we should work together. Yes, we should have unity. Yes, we should do these things. And yet, there's often not a lot of collaboration. Why do you think that is? Why is it that pastors and churches sometimes might have good intentions, but don't invest in a kingdom effort bigger than their church?
Yeah, I mean, it's not, I mean, this is statistically true. Like right now, even as of last week, there's some really extensive surveys by Barna Research that has gone out that's saying that like 33% of churches say that they're partnering with other organizations, and 23% of churches are partnering with other churches.
Hmm.
Even in the midst of a pandemic where we're all being flattening, still those numbers are still really low, and they're saying actually they're barely an uptick from where things were before COVID-19 came. So there's like a major disconnect right now when if with pastors or church leaders who are saying we believe that's a good thing, we know it's good to work together, but yet 23% are saying they're not doing anything with other churches. That's a huge issue. Now, I think like the one thing like is it's understandable that pastors aren't working together because it's hard.
Hmm.
You know more than anyone that it's really hard. So I really like to start the conversation with a lot of compassion,
Hmm.
knowing that like pastoring a church, no matter the size, is really difficult, and the shepherding needs. And I mean, one person in your church can often take a ton of effort, emotionally, time, and all of that kind of thing. It takes a ton of resources. Churches aren't really willing to um, really divert and put a lot of resources into what like working with other churches, and it takes a lot of sacrifice, I think, too. It's a huge step of faith to work with another church when we feel like, well, I don't want my people to go to that church, like, or I don't want them to like leave us because they're better or something like that. And so there's a huge step of faith in saying, I want to partner with other churches, even if it means somebody in my church is just like, hey, yeah, that they have a better kids ministry or that kind of thing. So, so I can't be too down, um, on this. Like, I don't want to be too negative, on pastors and just browbeat them with the statistics of like, this is ridiculous, they don't work together, because it takes a ton of sacrifice. And however, I think I want to change where we begin the conversation
Hmm.
around collaboration. I think that's my biggest desire personally, is from the conversation starting from like what's in it for me, or what's in it for my church, or how is this going to affect us, to more of the idea that we need to see more people follow Jesus. We need to see more people experience him in a unique way, and that being sort of the abundant, beautiful place, because there's we're though even in Columbus, where we see new churches being planted, and we see some of the country's fastest growing churches, we are still statistically seeing a decline in Christianity in the city. And a lot of that, I think, stems from we're just fighting for the same slice of pie
Hmm.
and not fighting for the other slice of pie, which is the people who have deep questions about God, and they need like real answers, not just sort of the canned Bible things, but like how do I wrestle with faith and that kind of thing. um, and I think the complexity of the city is just so great that we have to start working together, or we'll never see that. I think of Sanford Institute of Social Innovation came out with an article that just talked about that. It really basically said that there's no way a society will achieve large scale progress against urgent and complex problems unless there's a collective approach, and that collective approach becomes accepted as the way of doing business. It has to be the theme of how we do life together. And it's really hard for a pastor to step out into that and go into that space when nobody else is, or not many are, because then it feels like, well, if we all kind of take this step in that direction, then we still have this church over here, this ministry over here that's just fighting for that same slice of pie. And so you don't really see like a bigger vision
Hmm.
happen.
Talk to me more about that some of that disconnect. So you have been a local pastor for a number of years, and now you're in this role where you're working for an organization, Catalyst, which is not, on the other end of it. Where is there sometimes that disconnect between pastors and their vision and what they're doing about, and the organization of like a Catalyst or a parachurch that has this direction? Do you ever see, now that you've been in both roles, where do you see some of the disconnect?
Yeah, I think I think like, again, I'll start with sort of like I know how busy pastors are and the heavy
Mm,
expectations they carry. Um, yeah, and I know that pastors are doing the best they can for the most part, to love and to shepherd their people. But I think where I learn what I've learned is um, these parachurch types of people out there in the city, they actually, for the most part, want to help the church.
mm,
They want to help shepherd folks. Um, I think as a pastor, I was a little skeptical of those folks, to be honest, and not opposed, of course, and but I think I felt I just didn't feel a proactive desire to work beyond the local church into like a parachurch type of work. And I think Columbus actually, it's interesting because we have one of the largest parachurch ministry population. I don't know if that's the way you'd say it, but we just have a huge amount of these kind of nonprofit parachurch works going on. But I think knowing how to utilize them, and I think them knowing how to like really insert themselves as part of the church, I think there's still a lot to be talked about and explored in that. And I think for me, I'm always thinking about the local pastor and the local church, because I believe that, as one of my mentors, Rich Placid, say, that the church is the cutting edge of the kingdom of God. And I want to see the kingdom realized, not necessarily in the parachurch work, but in the local church. Another thing I found um, is that local church can sometimes have the same weariness that a pastor might have about spending too much time out there.
mm,
So like a church body has a little bit of that weariness of, there's so much going on within a congregation, within a church, to there's a weariness about even sending a pastor to do a lot of work out there. And so some pastors, and I've learned I'm one of these pastors, are drawn to more apostolic work. I think you might be in that category as well, where you're just prone to really want to know what's going on out in the land, and so to speak, and you want to network and gather churches together, and I want to build ministries that are needed in the city. But the Western church really doesn't have a category for pastors like that. Pastors are only, I'm generalizing a bit, but they're only shepherds, shepherds, chaplains. They're shaped and sort of called to just be caretakers of the church. And while it is 100% true, and I think right and is good, I think I don't want to downplay that. There has to be some kind of space for leaders in the city who want to advance and want to advance into the darkness, so to speak.
Mm.
And so I think what happens is, because the church doesn't really have roles for them, they go out and they start parachurch work.
Hmm.
They say, well, crew gives me a lot more freedom to do evangelism. This parachurch, whatever, might be just a lot better at like being able to like really be able to make disciples without a lot of the trappings and things going in the local church. And so I think Ephesians 4, of course, stresses that, where the church has to be a community of people that even has leaders that reflect all these different things: apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers, where we see all of those gifts activated at both a local, like a lay level of just the people in the church, but also the leadership of the church. So the apostles, the apostolic leaders, I'm saying apostles, lowercase a, not, not necessarily the big A, but that people who are starting new things and willing to go into new territory, they have to have a place just as much as the shepherds do within the leadership of the church. And I think we haven't really dealt a whole lot with that. And so that's why you just see so many parachurches starting. And so I think the best way to bridge that gap is to really figure out how do we build that, again, that ecosystem, even in our local churches, where there's different kinds of leaders that have different kind of roles.
Hmm. That's good. And it speaks to that vision. What is success? As we talked about earlier, the gospel is holistic, and I think the same way when we think of ministry success, if your vision's for the city and building an ecosystem, no one church is a movement. Like, no, we all play one part. And when we think of it that way, it's awesome because
Yeah.
now what happens at Sanctuary in Columbus with Rich, someone comes to faith, praise God. They grow, praise the Lord. Like, why would I feel threatened by that? I mean, you get like kingdom of man flesh might feel threatened by things, but if we can really broaden that vision, how do you guys try to do that with churches? I think you guys you did a bunch of research. What prevents us from living in this vision? I think, what was it? It was like humility, or you'd boiled it down with catalyst. There was like one thing. It was like not listening or humility that prevented people and pastors from doing it. How do we help pastors get that broader vision? Any thoughts on that?
Well, like what you said, there's just sort of a mentality of threats. Like, we're fighting for a very small slice of pie, and we're all fighting for that same slice in the city. And I think when another church gets that small slice, a piece of that, then we feel threatened, instead of like what you talked about, rejoicing. And I guess I'm saying this too, like, as somebody who, like, I deeply get it, because I understand sort of the like, oh, well, oh man, I wanted the glory or something for such and such thing. An example for me is, I got to see a friend of mine become a Christian, who I had been witnessing to for 6-7 years. And he became a Christian and came to Veritas one time. And it was his first time ever in a church. And I was praising God for that. And then next week he's gone, and I'm text him, where are you? Where are you? And he ends up going to this other church down, another neighborhood away. And I'm just like, what the heck, like, that was my flesh, just like I want that story. But he went somewhere where him and his wife could feel connected, and like she had made some connections somewhere else, and God had this interesting mosaic story going on. And so I had to like rejoice that my friend became a Christian.
Mm.
And that has to be the win. And I can recognize my pride in that and say, yeah, that was my pride. Like, but thankfully God knows better. And so I hope that we as pastors can start going more and more in that direction.
Mm.
Well, and churches too, where, and again, where we're looking into the other parts of the pie, and we're thinking like, okay, like how can I reach further out into the city?
That's good. Yeah, it's the same thing we preach. I mean, pastors aren't immune to struggling with some of that. I mean, I can certainly relate. What do you think, as we think back on that like lay leader concept, what are some ways pastors can shepherd their people, lead their people to have a city vision, that they see their part in the ecosystem? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I am one who believes that, I don't know if this is too much, but I think like every pastor should tithe their 10% of their time outside their local community.
Mm.
And I think so because I think it actually will aid their local community a million. It'll come back tenfold because pastors who are connected, locally connected, they have friends. And I mean, you and I know this week we just lost a friend of ours, another pastor who died and suffered just greatly under a lot of just pastoral stress. Had a lot of friends, but just local people that you're spending time with and you don't have to build strategy with and that kind of thing. But I also think your church is of course going to benefit from a healthier, happier pastor who doesn't feel so lonely and that kind of thing. But I also think you know what's going on. Like you're just you're seeing resources emerge that you can say that I think we need to do that as a church community. And I think just things that you can grab and pull in and utilize as a church to make your church stronger. And the last thing I think is that the church can sow into. So some churches that might have an abundance of particular resources may be able to sow into somebody else who doesn't. So, one of the things, a project right now that we're trying to do is like, how can some churches that might have more invest financially, be able to invest some finances into churches that don't, to buy masks and hand sanitizers during this virus, and how to help neighborhoods. So I think like just being a part of that gives you all these different angles to like be a healthier, have a healthier church with better resources, and also be able to give back.
That's good. As you think of the future, do you feel like, kind of getting into the a little bit subjective here, do you believe that the pandemic will lead to more unity, or do you think it will lead to more silo kind of territorial ministry? What do you think?
Yeah, this is my gut.
Prophet Nick.
Unfortunately, I don't see anything changing. That sounds really sad and depressing. I hope for more, but I'm not seeing the numbers. I mean, I'm not seeing the percentage increase significantly of collaboration, of connectivity. I think I mean, actually, it's funny statistically when you look at like the Barna research that they've been really on it every week, gathering real time data for a lot of churches, and they've seen that like the first 3 weeks of the pandemic, it was like, everybody's just bunkered down, and each church kind of just was taking care of its own, and that's understandable. And I think we're getting out of that more and more, and we're trying to figure out new ways to serve and love our neighbor and help others out. But I think now we're at this place where we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and churches are just waiting to get back to business as usual. There hasn't been a huge shift in, I think, philosophy or and I think, I mean, if we're pastors are leading the way, pastors are probably really tired coming out of this season. It's just emotionally exhausting I mean, mentally, there's been so many shifts, um, and you've had to make so many changes and start new things. I mean, at Scarlet City, it's like you guys have started 2 new like podcast thing, or video this during the week, you and Mike, and you're doing Sunday service online. None of that you guys were doing 3 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been this mental shift that you guys have gone through, that on top of just trying to still counsel people, call the members, check in on everybody, pastors are exhausted. So I feel like coming out of this, there's going to be sort of like a huge deep breath, and we'll see. By the way, I think that's if anybody at Scarlet City is really listening, I think is a good way to say, reach out to Jay O'Brien and Mike Jude and just text them and say, thank you guys.
Oh, I appreciate that, man.
You guys have done an amazing job.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's I think in this season I've gotten more encouraging notes from people than ever. It's been really, really sweet. I think we're reminded of the things that matter. Yeah, I think you might be right as far as on the other end. I think you and I have talked about this. In pressure situation, it reveals what people's true beliefs and foundations are. And I think for guys that are going to hunker down and like at the end of the day, that's their focus. I get it. For other guys, it almost does the opposite. I think for me, one of the things I felt is, and I've talked to Megan a lot about this, is, I'm going to die. Whether it's now or 10 years or 20, time's precious. And what legacy do I want to leave? I want to leave that we work together and we went for it. And it's better to do things with others than to do them alone. And so, hey, now's the time to work with others, and not just theoretically, but practically have skin in the game, that we're taking these steps, because I think it really honors God, honors God in it.
Well, not to like just be tooting on the horn of Scarlet City, but I think me being in the city space now and seeing the landscape of all of the churches going on, and there's some amazing churches in the city, as you know, I think Scarlet City has contributed far more to further renewal and transformation, and sort of even in voice and influence, than anybody probably really understands and realizes, because you guys you have partnered, you have collaborated, you guys have even with Sunday, just the weekly prayers for other churches and ministries, and having others chime in. I think those kinds of things, they have their benefit within Scarlet City, but outside, like, they're changing the conversation, and they're changing the tone, and they're changing like how a sanctuary feels and understands and interacts with other churches because of their relationship with Scarlet City. And I think you guys may not be doing like big food pantry like one church, not the actual one church, but like with a church, but you're like influencing the conversation in a really unique way with your relationship with Young Life and Moms to Be and Safe Families, all these things that you guys are doing. they're impacting those ministries in ways that I hope that Scarlet City really just takes a lot of pride in.
Hmm. That's good. Kind of last question. Again, thinking on the future, as you dream of ministry in the city, what, what do you hope? What do you hope for 5, 10 years from now? What in your mind, if God could bring together a real movement here, what could that look like?
I think like the first place that my mind goes to, and this is probably because the more of the people I work with, but I hope that we see a remnant of leaders emerging.
Hmm.
So there's more leaders that are willing to step out in faith and into um, not not just an embrace of city movement. Again, you said it already, most pastors already embrace the idea of it, but actually start taking steps of partnership and collaboration, and in small pockets, even just a couple churches just outside of their denomination and their network, and just learning. I think I've seen, for me personally, but I've also seen it more broadly, where a charismatic can sit down with a contemplative, and they're kind of learning this whole new language of
Hmm.
like, wow, I didn't know you could experience God in that way, or I didn't know you could. Um, and they're not unbiblical. It's not like one's more biblical than the other, or seeing various traditions start connecting. Networks start connecting more. I think you'll see a remnant. I'm hopeful to see a remnant of leaders emerging. Um, I think another thing is I'm hopeful to see the next generation of Christians. I'm seeing this now, and I think it's going to continue, where you see that the
Hmm.
people demand that the church would be connected.
Hmm.
Um, that they're connected because they want the church to deal with address issues of race, of sexuality, of economic disparity. There's the people are starting to really like hold. I think they're gonna start holding the church accountable. Say we want to not just hear sermons. We want to
Hmm.
see the connection. We want to see it actually happen. And thankfully, I just think there's a new generation that's not letting the church stay in neutral, but they're really pushing for an answer, which I think is going to just be awesome.
Hmm. That's
Those are a
really
few
good.
things that come to mind.
Yeah, man, I dream of those days, and to celebrate the things that are already happening. I think of one night. I think of a lot of the catalysts, the time when at Xenos and Vineyard coming together in some ways, and just some of the barriers being broken down, and that what it would look like for this to be normal. Like we all
Hmm.
have a pool, we pitch in to train leaders, churches partnering, addressing these issues that we don't need to do alone. Let's partner. And man, that stuff that gets me fired up. So,
Yeah, I think about like one night, which just happened online. Janelle sang, and she did amazing. Um, but I think like uh, just seeing all those churches coming together and singing and praying, and the diversity of Columbus, just incredible.
hmm,
And then just for me, my hope is that we don't stay there. That's like, we don't stay sort of in that photo op space where we
hmm,
can just create separate videos, but that we actually like start really as friends and ministry partners, and saying, oh yeah, you're not as weird as I thought, or
hmm,
you're not as arrogant as I thought, or you're not whatever, all the labels we threw on another pastor or another leader, but that we're actually saying, you're really strong at spiritual formation. Can we learn from you? Or you do small groups so well. Like, we need help. Or I want to learn to preach like you. Just, we see a lot more sort of rubbing shoulders in that. And I think we are starting to see some of that.
hmm. That's good. Well, man, I'm really thankful for you, and thank you for your work in the city. And we'll need to do this again. And yeah, I just really appreciate you and Brittany and the family being back in Columbus, and excited for what the future holds for us.
Me too, man.
All right. God bless you, Nick. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, bro.